Hi everyone, it's Henry here, and in this video I'm going to take you through how I would approach painting up a new Space Marine army for Horus Heresy. For that matter, any Marine army, and to a degree any other sort of army. And the idea is to try and take advantage of the massive Heresy buzz I'm on at the moment, but also to answer frequent questions that I'm asked, whether it's at events or whether it's comments on the YouTube video and whatnot, of basically how do I pick the scheme, what paints do I pick, why do I pick them, and particularly in part 2, so next week's video, how I translate an infantry scheme onto a vehicle. So for this I've chosen Blood Angels. It's Red is one of my favourite armies, and I think I really tried to approach this from a high level gaming army, so something that I would want to be getting best army nominations for, so something that looks good in the hand but also looks good 3 foot away or whatever. And I wanted to sort of echo or pay homage to that lovely orangey red Blood Angel scheme that we used to get back in Rogue Trader and second edition, and to a degree the Visions of Heresy stuff. So that's what I've gone for with this. I hope you enjoy it. Let's paint. So as I say, I wanted to pick an orangey red scheme. We've done a bunch of Blood Angel schemes in the past, but I wanted to do something new we haven't done for a few years. And I've got a real sort of thing at the moment for that sort of Visions of Heresy era or older sort of throwbacks. It's just what excites me at the minute. And obviously with the Mark 6 Marines, they've got that lovely, original RBT01 look anyway. So I got my big bag of red paints out and started going through them, really discarding any of the ones that were sort of a pinky red, and then there's certain ones like this Chimera orange. It's actually a really good color, close to what I was wanting, but it's not a particularly user-friendly paint. And if I'm going to do an army, then I want paints that I can easily get hold of, I can easily replace, and that are generally pleasant to work with without too much faffing. So discarding any of those that didn't fit the bill there. I thought Evil Sun Scarlet would probably be pretty decent. You can see here I've got a couple of scale paints for edge highlights, as I thought they might work. It doesn't matter that they're not that great in the airbrush or anything. I'm going to do that. Wildrider Red, that looks spot on, to be honest with you. And I was trying to go into this with no sort of preconceived ideas of the ones to use. Just sort of look at the colours and make the decisions from there. Again, Fire Dragon Bright does what it says in its orange one, as is this P3 Kador Red highlight, very similar colour. But again, in the UK, P3 paint's not so easy to find, so that was potentially something to consider. So winnowing it down, I have this sort of handful here. And I'm taking you through this literally as I was deciding it. Just put the camera on. So here's my sort of Citadel Reds, and I like using Citadel paints simply because they're easy to get hold of. Most people can reach them, and the majority of the videos I do for YouTube are recipe videos, that people enjoy following, or apparently do. And it was really nice seeing, sort of meeting people at the weekend actually that have used schemes and gone on to make their armies. So yeah, I'm discarding the Fire Dragon Bright there because it's just sort of too orange, as it were. Then I've got that Golgfag Brown and this yellowish Rust Panzer Aces. Those are nice. Those are sort of very sort of desaturated oranges. I thought they could work quite well for the edge highlight. Again, the Kador Red, just a bit too orange. And then these other two scale ones, just too dark, basically. I don't hate that one. I think it's Kalahari, but this is Flat Flesh by Model Colour. I actually thought that would end up being the perfect edge highlight, but on the tester it was a little bit too, was just too bright, really, for my tastes. And this little handful I've got here ended up being the trio of paints that I used. But as I say, at this point, I thought Flat Flesh would probably be the one. Which is why whenever I'm developing a scheme, even if it's just for the videos and nothing for me, I do a bunch of test models, not entire models, but when it's a Marine, the armour is the most important part, I think. So getting that right's the key. The rest we can almost do on the fly. So I did a couple of testers here, trying out the reds and the highlights. And the major difference between the two here is the guy with the chain bayonet on his bolter has a metallic base coat, and the guy on the right does not, has a traditional grayscale, black through white. Appreciate it. Everything else on them is exactly the same. And I liked that sort of brighter finish I seem to get from the metal base coat, even though we're not going to use clears or anything like that. So we base coat the model over a black primer. I'm using Dura Aluminium. It's a Metal Colour series paint. I always add a little drop of flow aid when I'm airbrushing this. I spray about 20 to 25 psi. I'm using a 0.4mm needle and nozzle. And this is in our Harder and Steenbeck Signature Series Evolution. And I'm just wanting pretty much full coverage. I suppose it's zenithal in a sense of maybe the very, very sort of lowest, darkest, deepest recesses are still the black primer, but it wasn't a concern. It was just to give it a shiny, a fairly neutral sort of shiny base. And then I'm going to cover the entire model using Mephiston Red. Now I've thinned this about 50-50, maybe a tiny bit more thinner than paint, just to get it going through. And in the end, what I wanted was 2 or 3 layers to create my base coat. So I didn't want to do it in a oneer, but equally I didn't want to be there for ages, you know, building it up. So I built that up there, 2 or 3 coats, and you can see there's not too much sort of nuance or anything to it, just gone straight over that silver. And at the moment, I'm not loving super high value contrast schemes. So that's not what I'm going for with this. Now, my main highlight, or my only airbrush highlight, is going to be Wildrider Red. I've thinned this slightly more than I thinned the Mephiston. So probably closer to 2 drops of thinner to 1 drop of paint. And I am focusing on the shapes that are on the model. I'm not overly worrying about a specific directional light source, other than sort of from above. So where the shoulder pad is a sort of cylinder and a sphere at the top, that's how I'm highlighting it up. And I'm trying to sort of make the center of the panels a little brighter on the whole. But you can see it's really quite a broad highlight that I'm doing. There's not a huge amount of that Mephiston left. And what I do is I go in and I do sort of an initial highlight. I'll let that dry, then I'll come back in and I'll make it a little bit more intense with a second one. But you can see here versus the one on the right. On the right, it's pure Mephiston. On the left, we have that Wildrider highlight. You can see it obviously completely changes it, and I love it. I think it was just what I wanted. It was that sort of desaturated orange red that I was going for. So now we'll just fast forward and I'll do the other one at the same time. And the reason I'm doing 2 is because when I've more or less decided on a scheme, I always try and practice it on a couple of models just to see how it translates to army painting. Anyone can paint one model up quickly. I wanted to see how it would translate to a couple. Because I'm not actually doing an army of this, you know, I would do this on, say, 5 Marines and see sort of how long it took me if there was anything I wanted to change during the process that I learned from doing that. And I want to say a quick thank you to those of you that support us over on Patreon. It means a huge amount to myself and Andy. Your support there means that both of us can do this full time now. So obviously on top of the classes, the miniatures, the paint range we've got coming out, we're also producing content over here on YouTube and on Patreon each week, different sorts of projects. Patreon tends to be multi-part series. So Andy's just starting a Lumineth figure he's doing at the moment over on there. That'll probably be 2-3 weeks worth of videos, as opposed to YouTube here where they tend to be sort of one-shot videos. You can see I've just compared the two there. I felt I had gone too broad with the highlights on this guy, so I'm just going back in with the Mephiston just to bring a little bit of that colour back into the shadows. But yeah, huge thank you to those of you that support us over there. And if for any reason you can't support us on Patreon, then likes, subscribes, comments, shares, all of that over here on YouTube make a huge difference as well. And I really, really do appreciate all of that support. So I've thinned the Mephiston maybe a touch more than I did the first time. As I say, and I'm only doing this because I haven't bothered doing it on the bolter guy because I felt I had the amounts correct between the highlight colour and the shadow colour. So now I want to do the decals. So I'm going to give the model a coat of gloss varnish. I usually give it sort of probably 3 or 4 coats of varnish on the areas where I want to apply the decals. But I'll link up in the top a video dedicated to doing that. And when the decal process was complete, I wanted to give the armour more or less its final finish at this stage, even though there's a lot of painting still to do. I wanted a more satin finish. That's what I'm enjoying at the moment, rather than the very, very matte finish that I've done in the past. And for that, I'm using Ammo MIG Lucky Matte Varnish, which all matte varnishes have a satin finish anyway. So that was what I liked for this one. So once that was dry, it was time to do a little bit of battle damage. So for this, I was going to do some chipping. And I've taken that yellowish rust colour. Now I know it's Vallejo have just, or are updating their model colour line, which this is part of. I don't know if that's going to be in the upcoming line or not. So I would probably look to see if there's, say, a Citadel equivalent to this out, which I'm sure there is. They've tons and tons of different sort of flesh colours and sort of orangey browns and things like that. So I'm sure there would be an equivalent in there. I haven't bothered looking because I have an entire bottle of this paint, so it's the one I'm using. And then a bit of sponging, and then going in with my brush and just taking my time and working around sort of tippy-tappy chips sort of along most of the edges. So it's kind of edge highlighting coupled with battle damage. And this is, let's say, the look I'm enjoying at the moment. I blocked everything else in black that I was going to do metal or black, and I felt at this stage that the chipping could do with just a little more. So I've gone in with a colour called Dark Rust here, which is a dark brown colour, and I'm just doing a few little darker chips here and there to suggest sort of deeper areas of damage to the armour. Probably taking me, well, I don't know, well, this is real time. It's taking me, what, a minute per miniature to do. And one of the big take-homes we'll talk about at the end is sort of the time involved in the project and why it's important. So once that was done, I went in and painted the metal parts. And for this, I chose Metal Colour Series Exhaust Manifold, which is a sort of dirty brown silver colour. I very deliberately wanted to steer clear of any silvers that were too blue because of how that will affect how the red looks. So I wanted that sort of dirtier colour on the silver. So I've done this on all the metal parts, including the guns. And I say for the guns, one of my favourite looks is just pure metal. I like that sort of stamped look. And then I was umming and ahhing, and I thought, oh, I'm gonna have a bit of a nod to that old school. Kind of got to have yellow chainsaws and hazard stripes and stuff. So I'd put it off, and I was just about to do this chainsaw all metal, and I thought, no, come on, don't be a coward. Paint it up, get it done. It'll be worth it. So I've just masked the model off using a bit of cling film, and then very, very simple, just base coating the chainsaw white. And I'm using Tamiya flat white in my airbrush. You use whatever white you like to use, but Tamiya's my favourite. So thinned it about 2 drops of thinner to paint with Tamiya thinner. Then once that was dry, I had a look through all my yellows, and I felt that the Bad Moon Yellow contrast paint was a really nice match of that sort of second edition yellow that we saw on the wonderful, Furiosa Dreadnought and the casings we got on those earlier Marines. And then to give it just a little bit of sort of interest, I didn't want to fully hazard stripe the entire chainsword because this isn't meant to be a retro scheme. This is just meant to have little inspired elements from the older sort of Rogue Trader second edition stuff, but I want it to look how I enjoy my Heresy stuff to look at the moment. So I put just a couple of little black stripes on near the top, and I felt that was enough of a nod. For the chipping, I've just gone straight in with white, and I'm doing sort of lots of chips here because I figure the chainsword will have more on it. And then when that was dry, I just go back in with the Bad Moon Yellow. The reason I didn't find another yellow to do it with was, one, I wanted to try and keep the paints down to an absolute minimum when I'm doing army painting. But also, it would change the yellow too much, and I really, really liked this colour. So by doing the white and then going over it, you could see the chips and stuff, but it was still that lovely Bad Moon Yellow. And then I go back in with Dark Rust, do a load more chips with that. So it didn't take long, and it's absolutely worth it in my opinion. It's a fairly eye-catching element to the miniature, and I'm using here the resin despoiler upgrades on that Mark 6. So here we can see them. So I took a little look at both of them at this stage. How are we doing? Because we're about to go in with oils. It's very simple. All the black parts you can see are just black. I use Vallejo Model Colour Black at the moment because that's the one I like, or the one that I can buy that I like. And yeah, I'm pretty happy. Simple. The red is what matters. Yeah, very happy. Very, very happy. I almost forgot to pop a wash over the metal parts. So this is just watered down rattling grime. So again, it's one thing I've learned from doing a lot of armies and doing things like that is giving yourself points during the process to literally sit and just look at the models and just think, have I missed something? And in this case, I had missed an obvious step. Now it's time for the oil wash. Now I'm choosing to use Sepia here by Absalom 502. That is because it is a very dark, cold brown colour, which is exactly what I wanted. I didn't want this to be none of this scheme, other than obviously the bright yellow chainsword, none of the scheme is meant to be particularly in your face. None of it's meant to be particularly high contrast or particularly saturated colours in any way. That's not my cup of tea, as I say, as opposed to the exception being the yellow chainsword there. And to thin it down into a wash, I'm using mineral spirits here. I knew initially it was far too thin, so I added a bit more paint in. And I'm just going to get a bit of plastic card here for you to see the thickness of the wash that I'm going to go for. So you can see it's fairly translucent, but I don't think I'll probably have to do more than one coat of this to get the intensity of the colour I want in the shadows. And I'm going to cover the entire miniature, but I'm ending my brush strokes, or trying to end my brush strokes, always in recesses. So I'm not leaving much of the paint on any of the flat surfaces, but it is getting a little bit, so it's creating an ever so slight filter over the whole thing, which will just help to grime it up a little, just dull that satin finish down a touch further, because this oil paint dries with quite a matte finish. And obviously make sure I'm going over all the metals as well. Let's say the entire miniature gets a coat of this. And then I left this overnight, but after about an hour, it would be about this stage. One of the reasons I like using these oils, because they dry relatively quickly. And then I'll just go in with a clean brush and just tidy up anything that I have to. If I've got a collection of the oil anywhere that I don't want it, I can just sort of clean it up a little. But as I say, I got that wash just about the right consistency, where there wasn't much cleanup required. Looking pretty nice, I think. Or I'm happy anyway at this stage. So again, it's more or less now the finishing touches stage. So I know I've obviously got the eye lenses to go. I felt at this stage that the black elements needed a little more to them. I will often just leave black areas like the connective ribbing and stuff black, and then using the brown oil wash I find often gives them enough interest. But this wasn't quite right, and this was how I would approach painting an army for me. You may think this looks great, or you'd be happy with it, in which case leave it at this point. But I wanted to give it a little more. And again, this was really inspired by seeing so many phenomenal armies at the weekend at the event, seeing where people had taken that step further because it was their passion, you know. So I've just gone in with Eshin Grey and done a few little edge highlights on the black elements. Then for the silvers, I go in with MIG gunmetal dry brush paint, and I'm kind of buffing them really with this, and I just find it takes the edge off the washes that you've put on already and just brings that sort of nice silver colour back. And then I do the same this time with a light metal, less of a dry brush of this, just trying to catch the edges. This is a very, very bright silver. So this is our highlight. The previous one, I say, was just to bring the colour back. This is very much to pick out those edges. And I absolutely love how this looks. I love how simple it is as a process, but I love the finish, and I love metallics. For me, it's like a quintessential Warhammer thing is having some metallics on there, and really, as is red. I think red's probably my favourite armour colour. So yeah, a lot of fun doing this scheme. And then areas that obviously I can't get with a dry brush, I will go in with a normal detail brush. Things like the bonding studs on the shoulder pad. Just put a little highlight on each of those. Again, just thinking, where would the light reflect? You know, it's generally going to be the sort of top edge of them. I also felt that I could pick out some of the yellowish rust highlights again. They've been dulled back, obviously, by the oil wash. So I've just gone into a few key areas, mainly around the head. So the helmet, the tops of the shoulder pads, the chest, just to brighten those up a little. And again, I think these steps are worth it. Nothing I'm doing here, I feel, is superfluous to the finish that I want on the miniature. I think everything we've done since that oil wash is very much an extra that you do if you want to do. But for me, it's worth it. Now, for the eye lenses, I've done these the same way I did them on Endred Har, the video I did last week. They're based off a way I did on a Raptor Marine a year or so ago for the Badab playlist that's on there, and it's based from a colour plate from the Badab books, the old Forge World books. Essentially, I've gone in with a dark green on all of the lens. Then I'm going to use a lighter green. In this case, I use Kabalite Green to draw a little line along the bottom edge of the lens. And then I gradually get brighter, adding Moot Green into that to try and create a sort of brightest spot in the middle, and then a little dot above it. Turns out it's not the easiest thing to film. I'm getting better, but it's not the easiest thing to film. But I've tried to leave as much in as I can. And do you know what? The biggest thing this has taught me doing this is that I need to sit and paint properly for a bit. I have been rattling through YouTube videos for such a long time trying to produce simple, fairly easy to replicate schemes that it's meant I might do one lens for the video and then I'm moving on to the next thing, which might not have a lens or whatever. What I need to do is sit down, bang out a squad or two of Marines or something, and just practice my finer brush skills again, because they've got a little sloppy. And I just need to get that motor control back, and it will come back nice and quickly. But it was frustrating, but also good. You know, I want to identify where weaknesses are. It's so easy to de-skill, I find, if you aren't constantly doing different techniques. So yeah, I absolutely am committing to doing a high-end gaming army this year, if not two, just to get back there. Here you can see I'm going in with the Moot, and the focus starts to go, all over the shop. And as is always the way, the one on the right there's going fairly well. Pretty happy with that. And the one on the left is just giving me no end of bother. Just splodging, cross-eyed nonsense I just can't get right. So when this happens, I tend to think the best thing to do is just, have a cup of tea and come back to it. And that's exactly what I did. Got there in the end. The basing, I've done exactly the same way as I did on Endred last week. So if you want to check that out, you can have a look at that video. Or I suspect next month, I'm hoping to give you an update on my solo project. I think this is how I'm going to do the bases on them. So I'll do a slightly more thorough tutorial, whatever you want to call it, on those. But yeah, here we go. So what were the aims? What was the intention of this project, as it were? So it was to take through how I would develop a scheme and then take it on to Armour. It just so happens that I discovered an awful lot about what I enjoy about painting during this, and I honestly think these are two of the best Heresy Marines I have ever painted. The processes, the steps, the colours are so few. Everything has been chosen very, very deliberately to have an impact at every single stage, but I feel that they look weathered and dirty and battle worn, which is how I like, but I also think they look interesting from 3 foot away, which is key. They don't look messy. It's easy to identify everything that's on the miniature. So yeah, from that point of view, very, very happy. The orangey red that we wanted, we've achieved with a handful of paints. And again, I think what helped contribute to that was that nice bright metallic base, just helping to bring that colour up slightly, but then also not just slopping oils all over it or washes all over it, or making sure we give thought to the colours that surround it as well. So I haven't gone for anything that would deliberately contrast very heavily with this red in any way. Try to keep everything fairly dull. Now, another reason I've chosen the Mark 6 is because these are basically the simplest marine miniatures you can find. There's nothing on them, really, as you can see. So when it comes to painting things like pouches for leather, some tabards, anything like that, those will come down the line. But I don't need those on a test model. My test models are here to tell me, is the most important part of this scheme the armour? Is it right? Yes, it absolutely is. I can figure out what brown or black or whatever to do the leather and stuff on them when I get to a miniature that has that on it. But again, personally, I don't glue anything like that on my line troops anyway. I save that for veterans and characters, things as easy ways to help distinguish them from it. But yes, the largest learning point for me with this is, if you want a nice looking army, you've got to take time to get there. As I say, I've focused so heavily on just smashing through things for the last few years on YouTube generally. Don't get me wrong, sometimes there's a project I take a bit more time on, but generally for YouTube, the last few years trying to build the channel, it's week after week after week, something new. And I think consequently I've de-skilled a little bit, and I need to address that. I need to be pushing myself. So I'm going to commit to you guys, commit to myself, endeavour to spend a little bit of personal time, what I have, on trying to sharpen those skills up. And I think we've got to a stage now, I feel, with YouTube where we have quite a committed, incredibly supportive group of people watching it. And I think that you're pretty happy for these projects to be a little bit more thorough, a little bit more in depth. So what I will try and do with most schemes from now on is sort of do the basics, for want of a better term, and then potentially take it a step further as a sort of, if you want to push this a bit, this is what you can do. Now, I don't think anything I've done to push these is particularly complicated. It is simply more time consuming. The lenses, for instance, once you're in the groove, you'll be smashing those out. But it was frustrating. I could have done them way easier, simpler ways than this, but I think the overall effect is good. It's not quite right. When I look at that Raptor I did, it's a much nicer execution, but I can get there. 5-6 Marines, I'll get there with that to be absolutely fine. So as I say, next week, we're going to paint up a Predator. Games Workshop has sent me through that Bile Predator upgrade kit for review, so I'm going to build up a Blood Angels Predator, and we'll paint that up with that. And we'll look at how do we translate this up to vehicles, and the other elements on the vehicles, how will we do those as well. So if you've got any questions about anything I've done in this video, I'd really love you to pop them down in the comments. As I say, I almost want this to be like not a fresh start, but the next chapter, as it were, in how we're going to be doing stuff here over on YouTube. So I say a little bit more thoroughly, and I hope I've explained my decisions for everything that I've done on this. And most importantly, let me know if you've enjoyed it. So thanks ever so much for all of your support. Take care, and I'll see you next time. If you've liked any of the models in this video and you fancy having an army of them yourself, but perhaps you don't have the time or wherewithal to get it done, consider dropping us an email at commissions@cultofpaint.com, and maybe Ben can sort you out.